The harsh fluorescent lights of the precinct flickered as I made my way through the bustling corridors. It was just another Tuesday morning in the life of Detective Chief Inspector Jack Hawthorne. Or so I thought. The smell of stale coffee and the constant hum of ringing phones filled the air, a familiar backdrop to the chaos that was the 7th Precinct of New York City. As I pushed open the door to my office, I caught a glimpse of my reflection in the glass. At 52, the job had taken its toll. Salt and pepper hair, crow's feet etching deeper by the day, and a perpetual furrow in my brow that seemed to deepen with each passing case. But behind those weary eyes lay a fire, a determination that had solved some of the city's most notorious crimes. "Morning, Chief," Detective Sarah Martinez called out as she passed by, a stack of files tucked under her arm. I nodded in response, a small smile tugging at the corners of my mouth. Sarah had been my right hand for the past 5 years, one of the few people I trusted implicitly in this line of work. As I settled into my worn leather chair, my eyes fell on the framed accolades adorning the walls. 23 years on the force, and each commendation told a story. The serial arsonist of '05, the child trafficking ring bust of 12, the corrupt mayor takedown of 18. They were more than just pieces of paper. They were testaments to a career built on unwavering integrity and an almost obsessive pursuit of justice. My fingers traced the edge of a recent newspaper clipping. "Hawthorne does it again. Drug kingpin brought to justice," the headline screamed. I remembered that case vividly. 6 months of undercover work, sleepless nights, and more close calls than I cared to admit. But we got him in the end. We always did. A knock at the door interrupted my reverie. "Come in," I called out, straightening up in my chair. Captain Rodriguez entered, his usually stoic face betraying a hint of concern. "Jack, got a minute?" I gestured to the chair across from me. "Of course, Cap. What's on your mind?" Rodriguez settled into the seat, his eyes darting around the room before finally meeting mine. "Jack, I've known you for 15 years now." 17, I corrected, a sense of unease creeping into my gut. "What's this about, Frank?" He leaned forward, his voice dropping to just above a whisper. "There's been some chatter. Internal Affairs is sniffing around." I felt my jaw clench involuntarily. What the hell for?" I don't know the details," Rodriguez replied, his eyes never leaving mine. "But whatever it is, it's big. They're keeping it under wraps, but I've got friends in high places. They're looking into you, Jack." The words hit me like a sucker punch to the gut. Me? Under investigation? It was absurd. I'd built my entire career on doing things by the book, on being the cop that other cops aspired to be. That's ridiculous. I scoffed, but even as the words left my mouth, I felt a chill run down my spine. What could they possibly have on me? Rodriguez shook his head. "I don't know, but I thought you should hear it from me first. Watch your back, Jack. Something's not right here." As he left, I found myself staring at the accolades on the wall again, but this time they seemed to mock me, each one a reminder of how far I'd come, how much I had to lose. I spent the rest of the morning in a daze, going through the motions of my daily routine. Briefings, case reviews, the usual bureaucratic dance that came with being the top detective in the precinct. But my mind was elsewhere, racing through every case, every arrest, every decision I'd made in the past year. What could have triggered an IA investigation? As the day wore on, I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. Colleagues I'd known for years seemed to avoid eye contact. Conversations hushed as I passed by. The precinct that had been my second home for over 2 decades suddenly felt alien, hostile even. By late afternoon, the tension was palpable. I'd caught Sarah giving me concerned looks more than once, but I waved off her attempts to talk. How could I explain something I didn't understand myself? Just as I was about to call it a day, my phone buzzed. An unknown number. Against my better judgment, I answered. "Hawthorne." I barked into the receiver. A distorted voice replied, sending chills down my spine. "Detective Chief Inspector Jack Hawthorne, man of the hour. Or should I say, man of the scandal. Who is this? I demanded, my free hand already reaching for a pen to jot down any details. A low chuckle crackled through the line. Let's just say I'm a concerned citizen, one who thinks it's time the truth about Jack Hawthorne came to light. What truth? I growled, my patience wearing thin. I've got nothing to hide. Oh, but you do, detective, the voice taunted. And soon, everyone will know. Check your email in 1 hour. And Jack, enjoy your last moments of peace. The line went dead, leaving me staring at the phone in disbelief. My mind raced, trying to make sense of the cryptic warning. What truth? What scandal? As the hour ticked by agonizingly slowly, I found myself pacing my office, jumping at every sound. The weight of my gun at my hip, once a comfort, now felt like a burden. Whatever was coming, I had a sinking feeling that no amount of firepower could protect me from it. At exactly 5:47 p.m., my computer pinged. New email. With trembling hands, I clicked open the message. The subject line read, "The Fall of Jack Hawthorne." And there it was, a video attachment. My cursor hovered over it, my heart pounding in my chest. Whatever this was, whatever truth was about to be revealed, I knew in my gut that nothing would ever be the same again. With a deep breath, I clicked play and watched as my world began to crumble around me. The video began to play, and for a moment, I couldn't comprehend what I was seeing. The grainy footage showed a dimly lit hotel room, unremarkable save for the two figures locked in an intimate embrace on the bed. As the camera zoomed in, my blood ran cold. The man in the video was unmistakably me. I stared at the screen in disbelief, my mind reeling. How was this possible? I had no recollection of this encounter, let alone being in that room. The woman, barely more than a girl really, looked to be in her early 20s. Her face was partially obscured, but I could make out long dark hair and a slender frame. As the video progressed, I felt a wave of nausea wash over me. The timestamp in the corner read February 15th, 2024, just 3 months ago. I racked my brain, trying to remember where I was that night. It was the day after Valentine's Day. I should have been home with my wife, Margaret. Margaret, oh God, Margaret. The thought of her seeing this video made my stomach churn. We'd been married for 28 years, weathered countless storms together. How could I explain something I couldn't even understand myself? I forced myself to keep watching, searching for any clue that might prove this was some elaborate hoax. But the evidence was damning. The man in the video moved with my mannerisms, spoke with my voice. It was me, and yet it wasn't. As the video neared its end, the young woman turned towards the camera, giving me a clear view of her face for the first time. My heart stopped. I recognized her, Laura Santos, a 21-year-old law student who had interned at the precinct last summer. Bright, ambitious, with a promising future ahead of her. And now, inexplicably, she was at the center of what could very well be the end of my career. The video cut to black, leaving me staring at my own shell-shocked reflection in the monitor. My mind was a whirlwind of questions and fears. How did this happen? Who recorded this? And more importantly, who sent it? A sharp knock on my office door jolted me back to reality. I quickly closed the video and cleared my throat, trying to compose myself. "Come in," I called out, my voice sounding foreign to my own ears. Sarah Martinez entered, her brow furrowed with concern. "Chief, are you okay? You look like you've seen a ghost." I forced a weak smile. "I'm fine, Sarah. Just a long day." She didn't look convinced. "Jack, I've known you long enough to know when something's wrong. What's going on?" For a moment, I considered telling her everything. Sarah had been my partner, my confidant for years. If anyone could help me make sense of this mess, it was her. But the words caught in my throat. How could I drag her into this? How could I ask her to believe something I couldn't even believe myself? "It's nothing," I lied, hating myself for it. "Just some personal stuff. Nothing to worry about." Sarah's eyes narrowed, but she nodded slowly. All right, but you know I'm here if you need to talk, right? I know, I replied, feeling a pang of guilt. Thanks, Sarah. As she left, I slumped back in my chair, the weight of the situation crushing down on me. I needed to think, to plan. If this video had been sent to me, it was only a matter of time before it reached others. I had to get ahead of this somehow. With shaking hands, I picked up my phone and dialed a number I'd hoped I'd never have to use. After 3 rings, a gruff voice answered, Malone. Jim, it's Jack Hawthorne. I need your help. Jim Malone was a private investigator, a former cop who'd left the force under a cloud of suspicion years ago. We butted heads more than once when he was on the job, but he was good at what he did. And right now, I needed someone who operated in the shadows. Hawthorne? Well, to what do I owe the pleasure? The sarcasm in his voice was palpable. I took a deep breath. I'm in trouble, Jim. The kind of trouble that could end my career. I need your discretion and your skills. There was a long pause on the other end. Finally, Malone spoke. Meet me at O'Malley's in an hour. Come alone. The line went dead before I could respond. I glanced at my watch. It was nearly 7 p.m. Margaret would be expecting me home soon. With a heavy heart, I picked up my phone again and dialed home. Hey, honey. Margaret's warm voice filled the line. Are you on your way? I'm sorry, Marge, I said, hating myself for what I was about to do. Something's come up at work. I might be late. There was a pause, and I could almost see the disappointment on her face. Again? Jack, you promised we'd have dinner together tonight. I know. I'm sorry. I'll make it up to you, I promise. Another pause. Okay, just be safe, all right? Always am, I replied, the lie tasting bitter in my mouth. I love you, Marge. I love you too, Jack. As I hung up, I felt a piece of my heart break. In 28 years of marriage, I'd never lied to Margaret. Not like this. But how could I face her with this hanging over my head? I needed answers first. I grabbed my coat and headed out, nodding to the night shift as I passed. The cool evening air hit me as I stepped outside, a stark contrast to the fever burning inside me. As I walked towards my car, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. O'Malley's was a dive bar on the outskirts of town, the kind of place where people went to disappear. As I pushed open the door, the smell of stale beer and cigarettes assaulted my senses. In the far corner, hunched over a glass of whiskey, sat Jim Malone. I made my way over, ignoring the curious glances from the bar's few patrons. Malone didn't look up as I slid into the booth across from him. You look like shit, Hawthorne, he grunted, taking a swig of his drink. Nice to see you too, Jim, I replied, signaling the waitress for a drink of my own. Malone leaned forward, his bloodshot eyes boring into mine. So, what kind of mess have you gotten yourself into this time? I took a deep breath and began to explain. As I spoke, I watched Malone's expression shift from skepticism to concern to something approaching sympathy. When I finished, he let out a low whistle. That's one hell of a situation you've got there, Jack, he said, shaking his head. You're sure you have no memory of this girl? None, I insisted. I mean, I remember her from her internship, but nothing beyond that. Certainly nothing intimate. Malone nodded slowly. All right, here's what we're going to do. I've got some contacts who can analyze that video, see if it's been tampered with. Meanwhile, we need to find this Laura Santos. If she's part of this, willingly or not, she's the key to unraveling this whole thing. As we hammered out the details of our plan, I felt a glimmer of hope for the first time since I'd seen that damn video. But as I left O'Malley's and headed home, a new fear gripped me. How long could I keep this from Margaret? And what would happen when the truth finally came out? Little did I know, the video was just the beginning. The real storm was yet to come, and it would test every ounce of my strength, my integrity, and my love. As I drove through the quiet streets of New York, I couldn't shake the feeling that my life as I knew it was over. The question was, what would rise from its ashes? The next morning, I arrived at the precinct earlier than usual, my mind still reeling from the events of the previous day. The bullpen was quiet, with only a few early birds at their desks. I made my way to my office, trying to ignore the paranoid feeling that everyone was watching me. As I settled into my chair, my phone buzzed. It was a text from Malone. Video analysis inconclusive. Meet me at the university at 10. I exhaled sharply, running a hand through my hair. I'd hoped the video analysis would provide some clarity, maybe prove it was a sophisticated deepfake. But inconclusive left me right back where I started. A knock on my door interrupted my thoughts. "Come," I called out, quickly composing myself. Sarah Martinez entered, a concerned look on her face. "Morning, Chief. You're in early." I forced a smile, just catching up on some paperwork. "What's up?" She hesitated for a moment before speaking. "Jack, there's something you should know. There are rumors going around the precinct about you and a student." My heart sank, so it had begun. I kept my face neutral, years of interrogation experience coming in handy. "Rumors? What kind of rumors?" Sarah looked uncomfortable. "Look, I don't believe them for a second, but people are saying there's a video of you with a young woman, a law student. They're saying internal affairs is involved." I leaned back in my chair, my mind racing. I needed to control the narrative, and fast. "Sarah, I appreciate you telling me this. The truth is, there is an investigation going on, but it's not what you think. I can't say more right now, but I need you to trust me. Can you do that?" She studied me for a long moment before nodding. "Of course, Jack. You know I've got your back." As Sarah left, I checked my watch. 9:15. I had to move fast if I was going to meet Malone at the university. The drive to New York University's law school was tense. Every red light felt like an eternity. Every passing police car a potential threat. As I pulled into the parking lot, I spotted Malone leaning against his beat-up Ford, a cigarette dangling from his lips. "Took you long enough," he grumbled as I approached. "Traffic," I muttered. "What have you got?" Malone took a final drag of his cigarette before crushing it under his heel. "Not much, but it's a start. Lara Santos, 21 years old, third-year law student, top of her class, involved in multiple student organizations. By all accounts, she's a model student. Any connection to me beyond her internship at the precinct?" I asked. Malone shook his head. "Nothing obvious. But here's where it gets interesting. I did some digging into her financials. 2 months ago, she received a large deposit into her bank account, $50,000. My eyebrows shot up. "From where?" "That's the thing," Malone said, lowering his voice. "The money came from an offshore account, untraceable." The implications were clear. Either Laura was involved in something illegal, or someone was paying her to be part of the setup. Neither option boded well for me. "We need to talk to her," I said, my detective instincts kicking in. Malone nodded towards the imposing law school building. "She should be in class right now. Room 305. As we made our way through the bustling hallways, I couldn't help but feel out of place. Students rushed past us, engrossed in conversations about case law and upcoming exams. It felt like a lifetime ago that I was their age, full of ambition and idealism. We found room 305 and peered through the small window in the door. The lecture was in full swing, with a professor droning on about constitutional law. My eyes scanned the room, finally landing on a familiar face. Laura Santos sat in the third row, her dark hair pulled back in a neat ponytail. She was focused intently on the lecture, scribbling notes. Looking at her now, it was hard to reconcile this studious young woman with the one in the video. "That's her," I whispered to Malone. He nodded. "What's the play here, Jack? We can't exactly burst in and start interrogating her in front of everyone." I thought for a moment. "We wait. The lecture should be over soon. We'll catch her as she's leaving." The next 45 minutes were excruciating. We retreated to a nearby alcove, trying to look inconspicuous as students and faculty passed by. Finally, the door to room 305 opened and students began pouring out. I spotted Laura immediately. She was chatting animatedly with a classmate, her bag slung over her shoulder. As she neared our position, I stepped out. "Ms. Santos," I called out. She turned, her eyes widening in recognition. "Detective Hawthorne, what are you doing here?" I forced a smile, acutely aware of the curious glances from passing students. I was hoping we could talk for a moment, in private. Laura hesitated, glancing at her friend. I have another class in 10 minutes. "This won't take long," I assured her, gesturing towards an empty classroom nearby. She nodded reluctantly and followed us into the room. As soon as the door closed behind us, her demeanor changed. The friendly smile vanished, replaced by a guarded expression. "What's this about, Detective?" she asked, her voice cool and composed. I cut straight to the chase. "A video has surfaced, Ms. Santos. A video of you and me in a compromising position. I think you know what I'm talking about." Lara's face remained impassive, but I noticed a slight tremor in her hands. "I'm afraid I don't know what you mean." "Cut the crap, kid," Malone interjected. "We know about the money. 50 grand doesn't just appear in a student's bank account for no reason." For a moment, I saw a flicker of fear in Lara's eyes, but it was quickly replaced by steely determination. I don't know who you are," she said to Malone, "but I don't have to answer any of your questions. And Detective Hawthorne, if you're here in an official capacity, I'd like to speak to my lawyer." I felt my frustration mounting. "This isn't an official investigation, Laura. I'm here because I need to understand what's going on. Who put you up to this?" "Why me?" Lara's composure cracked slightly. "You don't understand. None of this was supposed to happen like this. I never wanted to." She was cut off by the shrill ring of her phone. Laura pulled it out, glancing at the screen. The color drained from her face. "I have to go," she said abruptly, moving towards the door. I reached out to stop her. "Laura, please. Whatever's going on, I can help you, but you need to talk to me." She looked at me, and for a moment, I saw genuine anguish in her eyes. "I'm sorry, Detective Hawthorne. I truly am, but you can't help me. No one can." With that, she wrenched the door open and bolted out into the hallway. I moved to follow her, but Malone held me back. "Let her go, Jack," he said. "We can't make a scene here." I watched helplessly as Laura disappeared into the crowd of students. My mind was racing. What did she mean none of this was supposed to happen like this? Who had called her? And most importantly, what kind of trouble was she in? As we made our way back to the parking lot, I couldn't shake the feeling that we just scratched the surface of something much bigger and more dangerous than I'd initially thought. "What now?" Malone asked as we reached our cars. I took a deep breath, trying to center myself. "We need to dig deeper. Into Lara's background, her associates, everything. And we need to find out who made that call." Malone nodded. "I'll see what I can dig up. But Jack, be careful. This whole thing stinks to high heaven. Someone's going to a lot of trouble to set you up." As I watched Malone drive away, his words echoed in my mind. Someone was indeed going to a lot of trouble. The question was, why? What could possibly be worth destroying my career, my reputation, my entire life? Little did I know, the answer to that question would shake the very foundations of everything I thought I knew about justice, loyalty, and the thin blue line I'd spent my life defending. The next few days passed in a blur of clandestine meetings, late-night phone calls, and mounting paranoia. Every shadow seemed to hide a potential threat, every overheard conversation a possible lead. I was running on coffee and adrenaline. My nights plagued by fitful sleep and haunting dreams of that damn video. Margaret had grown increasingly concerned about my behavior. I'd been distant, distracted, coming home at all hours. I hated lying to her, but how could I possibly explain what was happening? The thought of her seeing that video, of the hurt and betrayal in her eyes was almost more than I could bear. It was on the fourth day after our encounter with Laura that Malone finally got in touch. His gruff voice on the phone carried a note of urgency I'd never heard before. "Jack, we need to meet. Now." The usual place. 20 minutes later, I was sliding into a booth at O'Malley's, the midday crowd sparse enough to ensure our privacy. Malone was already there, nursing a glass of whiskey, his face grim. "What V you got?" I asked, skipping the pleasantries. Malone leaned in, his voice low. "I've been digging into Laura Santos' background. On the surface, everything checks out. Model student, clean record, the works. But I found something interesting when I looked into her family." He slid a file across the table. I opened it to find a photo of a man in his late 40s, his features bearing a striking resemblance to Laura. "Meet Michael Santos, Lara's father," Malone continued. "Former NYPD detective, forced into early retirement 5 years ago." My brow furrowed. "Forced retirement? Why?" Malone's eyes darted around the bar before he spoke. "Officially, health reasons. Unofficially, there were rumors of corruption, Jack. Big-time stuff. Taking bribes, tampering with evidence, the works. But nothing ever stuck." I felt a chill run down my spine. "And you think this is connected to what's happening now?" "I'm not sure," Malone admitted. "But here's where it gets interesting. 2 months before Santos retired, he was working a case. A big one, the kind that makes careers. Let me guess," I interjected, "right around the time Laura got that mysterious deposit." Malone nodded. "Bingo. The case involved a major drug trafficking operation. Santos was lead detective. But just as they were closing in on the kingpin, the whole thing fell apart. Key witnesses recanted. Evidence went missing. The case was dropped, and a few months later, Santos was out. My mind was racing, trying to connect the dots. "So you think Santos is behind this? Using his daughter to what? Get revenge?" Malone shrugged. "It's a theory, but there's more. I did some digging into that offshore account that paid Laura. It's tied to a shell company, which is tied to another shell company, and so on. But at the end of that rabbit hole, I found a name. Viktor Krasnov. The name hit me like a punch to the gut. Viktor Krasnov was a ghost, a boogeyman in the criminal underworld. Rumors had circulated for years about his operations, drugs, weapons, human trafficking. But no one had ever been able to pin anything on him. He was always one step ahead, always just out of reach. Jesus, I muttered, running a hand through my hair. If Krasnov is involved in this, then we're in way over our heads. Malone finished grimly. We sat in silence for a moment, the weight of this new information settling over us. Finally, I spoke. "We need to talk to Santos. If he's involved, maybe we can." I was cut off by the sudden blaring of my phone. It was Sarah. "Jack." Her voice was tight with urgency. "You need to get back to the precinct. Now. IA is here, and they're asking for you." My blood ran cold. "I'm on my way." As I hung up, Malone raised an eyebrow. "Trouble? Internal affairs," I said, already standing. "They're at the precinct." Malone's face darkened. "Be careful, Jack. This thing is bigger than both of us. Watch your back." I nodded, my mind already racing ahead to what awaited me at the precinct. As I drove, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was heading into the lion's den. The precinct was a hive of nervous energy when I arrived. Hushed conversations stopped as I walked by, replaced by meaningful glances and poorly concealed whispers. I made my way to my office, where Sarah was waiting, her face a mask of concern. "Jack," she said as soon as I closed the door. "What the hell is going on?" "IA is in the captain's office. They're talking about suspending you pending an investigation." I sank into my chair, the weight of the situation crushing down on me. "Sarah, I can't tell you everything right now, but I need you to trust me. I haven't done anything wrong. She studied me for a long moment before nodding. I do trust you, Jack. But whatever this is, it's serious. You need to be prepared. Before I could respond, there was a sharp knock at the door. Captain Rodriguez entered, flanked by two stern-faced men in suits. I recognized one of them, Agent Thompson from Internal Affairs, a man I butted heads with more than once over the years. "Detective Hawthorne," Thompson said, his voice cold. "We need to talk." The next hour was a blur of accusations and denials. They had the video, of course. They knew about my meeting with Laura at the university. They even knew about my clandestine meetings with Malone, though they didn't seem to know the specifics of what we discussed. Through it all, I maintained my innocence. But with each passing minute, I could see the doubt growing in Rodriguez's eyes. By the end of the meeting, it was clear that my fate was sealed, at least for now. "Detective Hawthorne," Rodriguez said, his voice heavy, "in light of the evidence presented, you are hereby suspended pending a full investigation. Please surrender your badge and weapon." The words hit me like a physical blow. I'd known it was coming, but nothing could have prepared me for the reality of it. With shaking hands, I unclipped my badge and placed it on the desk, followed by my service weapon. As I left the precinct, my colleagues' eyes following me, I felt like a man walking to the gallows. Everything I'd worked for, everything I'd built over the past 2 decades, was crumbling around me. But as I stepped out into the fading daylight, a new resolve began to form. If they wanted to take me down, they'd have to do it over my dead body. I was going to fight this, and I was going to win, not just for myself, but for Laura, for Margaret, for everyone who'd ever believed in me. The game was far from over. In fact, it was just beginning, and I intended to play it to the bitter end, no matter the cost. As I drove home, my mind racing with plans and possibilities, I couldn't shake the feeling that the worst was yet to come. Little did I know how right I was, or how deep this rabbit hole would go. The next few days would test me in ways I'd never imagined, pushing me to the very limits of my resolve, my ethics, and my sanity. But one thing was certain: I wasn't going down without a fight, and God help anyone who stood in my way. The drive home felt like the longest of my life. The weight of my missing badge and gun left an almost physical ache, a constant reminder of how quickly my world had unraveled. As I pulled into the driveway, I saw Margaret's silhouette in the window. My heart sank. How could I possibly explain this to her? I barely had time to close the front door behind me before Margaret appeared, her face etched with worry. "Jack, what's going on?" Sarah called. She said something happened at work. I took a deep breath, steeling myself for what was to come. "Marge, we need to talk." Over the next hour, I laid it all out for her: the video, the suspension, everything. Well, almost everything. I left out the parts about Malone and our investigation into Lara's background. The less Margaret knew about that, the safer she'd be. To her credit, Margaret listened without interruption, her expression shifting from shock to disbelief to anger. When I finished, the silence that fell between us was deafening. "I don't understand," she finally said, her voice barely above a whisper. "How could this happen? How could they think you'd do something like this?" I reached for her hand, relief washing over me when she didn't pull away. "I don't know, Marge, but I swear to you I'm innocent. Someone set me up, and I'm going to find out who and why." Margaret's eyes met mine, searching for something. Whatever she saw there seemed to satisfy her. She squeezed my hand. "I believe you, Jack. We'll get through this. Together." Her unwavering support nearly broke me. I pulled her into an embrace, burying my face in her hair, allowing myself a moment of vulnerability. But the moment was short-lived. My phone buzzed insistently in my pocket. I pulled away reluctantly, checking the screen. It was Malone. "I have to take this," I said apologetically. Margaret nodded, understanding in her eyes. I stepped out onto the back porch, the cool night air a stark contrast to the warmth of the house. "What be you got, Malone?" "We've got a problem, Jack." Malone's gruff voice came through. "Michael Santos is dead." The words hit me like a punch to the gut. "What? How?" "Car accident, if you can believe it. Happened about an hour ago. He was leaving his apartment, lost control of his car, went right into a concrete barrier." My mind raced. The timing was too convenient to be a coincidence. This wasn't an accident, was it? "Not a chance in hell," Malone confirmed. "I've got a contact in the ME's office. He's going to let me know if he finds anything suspicious." I ran a hand through my hair, frustration mounting. Damn it. Santos was our best lead. Without him, we're not out of options yet. Malone interrupted. "I've been doing some more digging on Krasnov. Word on the street is he's in town. There's a charity gala tomorrow night at the Ritz-Carlton. All the city's elite will be there, including our friend Victor." I felt a surge of adrenaline. This could be our chance. "Can you get me in?" "Already working on it. I'll have an invitation for you by morning. But Jack, be careful. If Krasnov is behind all this, he's not going to be happy to see you." "Let him try something," I growled. "I've got nothing left to lose." As I hung up, I turned to find Margaret standing in the doorway, her face a mix of concern and determination. "You're going after them, aren't you?" I nodded, not bothering to deny it. "I have to, Marge. It's the only way to clear my name." She stepped forward, taking my hands in hers. "I know. Just promise me you'll be careful. I can't lose you, Jack." I pulled her close, pressing a kiss to her forehead. "I promise. I'll come back to you. Always." The next evening found me adjusting my bow tie in the mirror, feeling uncomfortably exposed in the rented tuxedo. Margaret appeared behind me, helping to smooth out my jacket. "You clean up nice, detective," she said with a small smile, but I could see the worry in her eyes. I turned to face her, cupping her cheek in my hand. "I'll be fine. Malone's got my back, and we've got a solid plan." She nodded, leaning into my touch. "I know. Just remember your promise." With a final kiss, I headed out, my mind already racing with the possibilities of what the night might bring. The Ritz-Carlton was a sea of glittering gowns and polished tuxedos. I made my way through the crowd, nodding and smiling as if I belonged there. Malone had done his job well. No one questioned my presence. I spotted Krasnov almost immediately. He was hard to miss, tall, imposing, with a shock of silver hair and piercing blue eyes. He was surrounded by a group of admirers, laughing at some joke I couldn't hear. As I maneuvered closer, I caught snippets of conversation. "Truly admirable work, Mr. Krasnov. Your foundation's contributions to the city." I felt a surge of anger. Here was a man responsible for untold suffering, being lauded as a philanthropist. It made me sick. Finally, I saw my opening. Krasnov had broken away from the group, heading towards the bar. I intercepted him, deliberately bumping into him. "Oh, I'm so sorry," I said, feigning embarrassment. "Mr. Krasnov, isn't it? I've heard so much about your work." Krasnov's eyes narrowed slightly, but his smile remained fixed. "No harm done, mister." "Hawthorne," I supplied, watching closely for any reaction. "Jack Hawthorne." For a split second, I saw it, a flash of recognition, quickly masked. "Ah, Detective Hawthorne. I've heard about you as well. Quite the predicament you found yourself in." I felt my jaw clench. "Yes, well, sometimes things aren't quite what they seem. I'm sure you know all about that, wouldn't you, Mr. Krasnov?" His smile turned cold. "I'm not sure I know what you mean, Detective, but perhaps we should continue this conversation somewhere more private." He gestured towards a secluded balcony. I followed, my heart pounding. This was it, the moment of truth. As soon as we were alone, Krasnov's demeanor changed entirely. The affable philanthropist was gone, replaced by something far more dangerous. "You're playing a very dangerous game, Detective Hawthorne," he said, his voice low and menacing. "I would advise you to walk away now, while you still can." I stood my ground, Not a chance. I know you're behind this, Krasnov. The video, Santos, all of it. Why? What's your endgame? Krasnov chuckled, but there was no humor in it. My endgame? Detective. You have no idea what you're dealing with. This goes far beyond you or me. There are forces at play here that would make your head spin. Try me, I challenged. He studied me for a long moment before speaking. Very well. Since you seem determined to dig your own grave, I'll give you a shovel. The truth, Detective Hawthorne, is that your precious police department is rotten to the core. Corrupt officers, dirty money, evidence tampering. It goes all the way to the top. I felt my world tilt on its axis. That's impossible. I would have known. Would you? Krasnov interrupted. Or were you too busy being the department's golden boy to see what was happening right under your nose? Michael Santos saw it. He was going to expose it all. That's why he had to be neutralized. The pieces were starting to fall into place, but something still didn't add up. And Laura, where does she fit into all this? As soon as we were alone, Krasnov's demeanor changed entirely. The affable philanthropist was gone, replaced by something far more dangerous. You're playing a very dangerous game, Detective Hawthorne, he said, his voice low and menacing. I would advise you to walk away now, while you still can. I stood my ground. Not a chance. I know you're behind this, Krasnov. The video, Santos, all of it. Why? What's your endgame? Krasnov chuckled, but there was no humor in it. My endgame? Detective. You have no idea what you're dealing with. This goes far beyond you or me. There are forces at play here that would make your head spin. Try me, I challenged. He studied me for a long moment before speaking. Very well. Since you seem determined to dig your own grave, I'll give you a shovel. The truth, Detective Hawthorne, is that your precious police department is rotten to the core. Corrupt officers, dirty money, evidence tampering. It goes all the way to the top. I felt my world tilt on its axis. That's impossible. I would have known. Would you? Krasnov interrupted. Or were you too busy being the department's golden boy to see what was happening right under your nose? Michael Santos saw it. He was going to expose it all. That's why he had to be neutralized. The pieces were starting to fall into place, but something still didn't add up. And Laura, where does she fit into all this? Krasnov's smile was cold. Insurance, Detective. A way to keep you distracted while the real game played out. She was quite convincing, wasn't she? The scared student in over her head. She played her part well. Anger surged through me. I stepped forward, my fist clenched. You bastard. You used that girl, destroyed my career for what? To protect your criminal empire. Krasnov didn't flinch. My criminal empire, as you call it, is just a small part of a much larger picture. One that you're now a part of, whether you like it or not. Before I could respond, a commotion erupted in the ballroom. I turned to see a group of men in suits pushing their way through the crowd, headed in our direction. Krasnov's smile widened. Ah, it seems our time is up, Detective. I do hope you enjoyed our little chat. It may be the last one you have as a free man. As the men, clearly federal agents, approached, I realized with sickening clarity that I'd walked right into a trap. Krasnov had played me perfectly, luring me out into the open. But as they reached for their handcuffs, I made a split-second decision. I wasn't going down like this. Not without a fight. With a quick prayer that Margaret would forgive me for breaking my promise, I vaulted over the balcony railing, landing hard on the terrace below. Ignoring the shouts and the pain shooting through my legs, I took off running into the night. The game had changed. I was now a fugitive, hunted by both sides of the law. But I had information now, dangerous information that could bring down an entire system of corruption. As I disappeared into the shadows of the city, one thought burned in my mind. This wasn't over, not by a long shot. The real fight was just beginning. The harsh fluorescent lights of the 7th Precinct flickered as I made my way through the bustling corridors. It was just another Tuesday morning in the life of Detective Chief Inspector Jack Hawthorne. Or so I thought. The smell of stale coffee and the constant hum of ringing phones filled the air, a familiar backdrop to the organized chaos that was the New York City Police Department. As I pushed open the door to my office, I caught a glimpse of my reflection in the glass. At 52, the job had taken its toll, salt and pepper hair, crow's feet etching deeper by the day, and a perpetual furrow in my brow that seemed to deepen with each passing case. But behind those weary eyes lay a fire, a determination that had solved some of the city's most notorious crimes. "Morning, Chief," Detective Sarah Martinez called out as she passed by, a stack of files tucked under her arm. I nodded in response, a small smile tugging at the corners of my mouth. Sarah had been my right hand for the past 5 years, one of the few people I trusted implicitly in this line of work. As I settled into my worn leather chair, my eyes fell on the framed accolades adorning the walls. 23 years on the force, and each commendation told a story. The serial arsonist of '05, the child trafficking ring bust of 12, the corrupt mayor takedown of 18. They were more than just pieces of paper. They were testaments to a career built on unwavering integrity and an almost obsessive pursuit of justice. My fingers traced the edge of a recent newspaper clipping. "Hawthorne does it again. Drug kingpin brought to justice," the headline screamed. I remembered that case vividly. 6 months of undercover work, sleepless nights, and more close calls than I cared to admit. But we got him in the end. We always did. A knock at the door interrupted my reverie. "Come in," I called out, straightening up in my chair. Captain Frank Rodriguez entered, his usually stoic face betraying a hint of concern. "Jack, got a minute?" I gestured to the chair across from me. "Of course, Frank. What's on your mind?" Rodriguez settled into the seat, his eyes darting around the room before finally meeting mine. "Jack, I've known you for 15 years now." 17, I corrected, a sense of unease creeping into my gut. "What's this about?" He leaned forward, his voice dropping to just above a whisper. "There's been some chatter. Internal Affairs is sniffing around." I felt my jaw clench involuntarily. What the hell for?" I don't know the details," Rodriguez replied, his eyes never leaving mine. "But whatever it is, it's big. They're keeping it under wraps, but I've got friends in high places. They're looking into you, Jack." The words hit me like a sucker punch to the gut. Me, under investigation? It was absurd. I'd built my entire career on doing things by the book, on being the cop that other cops aspired to be. "That's ridiculous." I scoffed. But even as the words left my mouth, I felt a chill run down my spine. What could they possibly have on me? Rodriguez shook his head. "I don't know, but I thought you should hear it from me first. Watch your back, Jack. Something's not right here." As he left, I found myself staring at the accolades on the wall again, but this time they seemed to mock me, each one a reminder of how far I'd come, how much I had to lose. I spent the rest of the morning in a daze, going through the motions of my daily routine. Briefings, case reviews, the usual bureaucratic dance that came with being the top detective in the precinct. But my mind was elsewhere, racing through every case, every arrest, every decision I'd made in the past year. What could have triggered an IA investigation? As the day wore on, I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. Colleagues I'd known for years seemed to avoid eye contact. Conversations hushed as I passed by. The precinct that had been my second home for over 2 decades suddenly felt alien, hostile even. By late afternoon, the tension was palpable. I'd caught Sarah giving me concerned looks more than once, but I waved off her attempts to talk. How could I explain something I didn't understand myself? Just as I was about to call it a day, my phone buzzed. An unknown number. Against my better judgment, I answered. "Hawthorne." I barked into the receiver. A distorted voice replied, sending chills down my spine. "Detective Chief Inspector Jack Hawthorne, man of the hour." Or should I say, man of the scandal? Who is this? I demanded, my free hand already reaching for a pen to jot down any details. A low chuckle crackled through the line. Let's just say I'm a concerned citizen, one who thinks it's time the truth about Jack Hawthorne came to light. What truth? I growled, my patience wearing thin. I've got nothing to hide. Oh, but you do, detective, the voice taunted. And soon everyone will know. Check your email in 1 hour. And Jack, enjoy your last moments of peace. The line went dead, leaving me staring at the phone in disbelief. My mind raced, trying to make sense of the cryptic warning. What truth? What scandal? As the hour ticked by agonizingly slowly, I found myself pacing my office, jumping at every sound. The weight of my gun at my hip, once a comfort, now felt like a burden. Whatever was coming, I had a sinking feeling that no amount of firepower could protect me from it. At exactly 5:47 p.m., my computer pinged. New email. With trembling hands, I clicked open the message. The subject line read, "The Fall of Jack Hawthorne." And there it was, a video attachment. My cursor hovered over it, my heart pounding in my chest. Whatever this was, whatever truth was about to be revealed, I knew in my gut that nothing would ever be the same again. With a deep breath, I clicked play and watched as my world began to crumble around me. The video was grainy, clearly shot from a hidden camera. As the image came into focus, I felt the blood drain from my face. It showed a hotel room, dimly lit and unremarkable. But what caught my attention was a figure sitting on the edge of the bed, me. I leaned closer to the screen, my mind reeling. How was this possible? I had no recollection of being in that room. As I watched, another figure entered the frame. A young woman, no more than 25, with long dark hair and a nervous smile. "Detective Hawthorne," she said, her voice tinny through the computer speakers. "I'm so glad you agreed to meet me." I watched in horror as my on-screen self stood up, swaying slightly. Was I drunk? Drugged? The Jack Hawthorne I knew would never put himself in such a compromising position. "Of course, sweetheart." My doppelganger slurred. "Anything for a pretty face." The scene that unfolded over the next few minutes made me physically ill. I watched as the man who looked exactly like me engaged in increasingly intimate behavior with the young woman. It was a textbook honeypot operation, the kind of thing we warned rookie cops about. As the video came to an end, a final message flashed across the screen. "How the mighty have fallen. This goes public in 24 hours, unless you play ball, Hawthorne." I sat back in my chair, my mind a whirlwind of confusion and fear. That wasn't me in the video. It couldn't be. But the resemblance was uncanny, right down to the scar on my left hand from a knife fight years ago. My first instinct was to call Rodriguez, to get ahead of this before it spiraled out of control. But as my hand reached for the phone, I hesitated. Who could I trust? If this video was to be believed, I'd been set up in a major way. Anyone could be involved. I needed time to think, to figure out my next move. But time was the one thing I didn't have. In 24 hours, my entire life, my career, my reputation, my family would be destroyed. As I sat there, staring at the frozen image on my computer screen, one thought kept running through my mind. How did I end up here? After years of walking the straight and narrow, of being the poster boy for integrity in the force, how had I become the target of such an elaborate scheme? I knew one thing for certain. I couldn't face this alone. I needed allies, people I could trust implicitly. Sarah Martinez came to mind immediately. She'd been my partner for years, and if anyone would stand by me, it would be her. With shaking hands, I picked up my phone and dialed her number. As it rang, I took a deep breath, steeling myself for the conversation to come. How do you tell someone that your entire life is about to implode? "Sarah," I said when she answered, my voice barely above a whisper. "I need your help. Meet me at O'Malley's in an hour. And Sarah, don't tell anyone where you're going." As I hung up, I cast one last glance around my office. The accolades on the wall, once a source of pride, now seemed to mock me. 23 years of service, of putting my life on the line for the city. And it could all come crashing down because of a video I had no memory of. I grabbed my coat and headed for the door, my mind already racing with possible explanations, alibis, anything that could help me make sense of this nightmare. As I stepped out into the cool evening air, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. The game had changed, and I was now playing for the highest stakes of my life. Whatever was coming, I knew one thing for certain. I wasn't going down without a fight. The hunt for the truth had begun, and I was both the hunter and the hunted. You're correct. After Part 6, we would typically move on to Part 7, which would be the final part of our story based on the original outline. However, since you've asked me to continue, I'll proceed with Part 7, which corresponds to the redemption and revelation topic from the synopsis. Here's the continuation. The rain pounded mercilessly against the windows of my small apartment, mirroring the tumultuous storm raging inside my mind. It had been 3 weeks since my world had been turned upside down by that damned video. 3 weeks of sleepless nights, clandestine meetings, and a growing sense that I was caught in a web far more intricate than I'd initially imagined. I stood by the window, watching the city lights blur through the raindrops, a glass of whiskey untouched in my hand. The weight of my gun, tucked into its holster, felt heavier than ever. In the reflection of the glass, I barely recognized the man staring back at me. Unshaven, eyes sunken, the very picture of a man on the edge. A soft knock at the door jolted me from my reverie. I tensed, hand instinctively moving towards my weapon. "Who is it?" I called out, voice hoarse from lack of use. "It's me, Jack. Sarah." I relaxed slightly, moving to open the door. Sarah Martinez stood in the hallway, rain-soaked and looking as exhausted as I felt. "Jesus, Sarah, it's 2 a.m. What are you doing here?" She pushed past me into the apartment, shrugging off her wet coat. "I've got something, Jack. Something big." My heart rate quickened. "What is it?" Sarah pulled out a USB drive from her pocket. "You're not going to believe this." As she plugged the drive into my laptop, I felt a mix of anticipation and dread. The past weeks had been a roller coaster of leads and dead ends, each revelation seeming to raise more questions than answers. "I've been doing some digging," Sarah explained as she pulled up a series of files. "Into Laura Santos, into the money trail, everything. And Jack, this goes way deeper than we thought." She pulled up a document, a police report from 5 years ago. "Remember Michael Santos?" I nodded. Lara's father, former detective, forced into early retirement under suspicious circumstances. Right. Well, it turns out he was working a big case just before he was pushed out. A case involving a major drug trafficking operation. My brow furrowed. What's that got to do with me? Sarah's eyes met mine, a grim determination in them. The case was dropped suddenly. Key witnesses recanted. Evidence went missing. And guess who was a rising star detective assigned to assist on the case? The realization hit me like a punch to the gut. "Me." She nodded. "You were brought in near the end, just as everything was falling apart. Your report was what ultimately led to the case being dismissed." I shook my head, memories flooding back. I remember that case. Everything seemed off, but I couldn't put my finger on why. I just reported what I found. "Exactly," Sarah said, pulling up another file. "But here's where it gets interesting. I managed to track down one of the witnesses who recanted. He's dead now, liver failure last year, but before he died, he left this." She played an audio file. A raspy voice filled the room. "I lied. We all lied. They got to us, threatened our families. But it wasn't just the cartel. There were cops involved, high-ranking ones. They're still out there, still pulling the strings." I felt the blood drain from my face. "Are you saying?" Sarah nodded grimly. "There's a group within the department, Jack. High-ranking officers who've been on the take for years. They've been protecting this cartel, manipulating cases, eliminating threats. And I was getting too close, I muttered, the pieces finally falling into place. Not just you, Sarah continued. Michael Santos was onto them. That's why he was forced out. And Laura, they're using her to get to me. I finished, the realization dawning. But why now? Why not 5 years ago? Sarah pulled up one last file, a series of bank statements. Because of this, over the past year, there's been a power struggle within the cartel. The old guard is being pushed out, and with them, their police connections. The new leadership wants to clean house on both sides. I slumped into a chair, my mind reeling. So the video, the setup, it's all to discredit me before I can expose them. Sarah nodded, and it's not just you they're after. Anyone who might know something is a target. As if on cue, my phone buzzed. It was Malone. Jack, we've got a problem. Laura Santos is missing. I felt my blood run cold. What do you mean missing? She didn't show up for classes today. Her roommate says she left in a hurry last night. Said something about meeting her father. I exchanged a glance with Sarah. Her father? But he's been out of the picture for years. Exactly, Malone replied. I've got a bad feeling about this, Jack. As I hung up, a sense of urgency gripped me. We need to find her, Sarah. If they've got her, Sarah was already grabbing her coat. I'll put out an APB. Where are you going? I checked my gun, a grim determination settling over me to have a chat with an old friend. An hour later, I stood outside the rundown apartment of former Captain Frank Rodriguez. He'd retired 2 years ago, but if anyone knew about corruption in the higher ranks, it would be him. I pounded on the door. Frank, open up. It's Jack. The door creaked open, revealing Rodriguez's haggard face. Jack, what the hell are you doing here at this hour? I pushed my way inside. Cut the crap, Frank. I know about the cartel, about the corrupt cops. I know you were part of it. Rodriguez's face fell, the fight seeming to drain out of him. He slumped into a chair. So you finally figured it out. Took you long enough. Where's Laura Santos? I demanded. He looked up, confusion evident. Laura? Michael's kid? What's she got to do with this? I quickly filled him in on the events of the past weeks. As I spoke, I saw a mix of emotions play across Rodriguez's face, shock, guilt, and finally, a grim resolve. Jesus, Jack. I had no idea it had gone this far, he said, running a hand over his face. Look, I'm not proud of what I did, but you have to understand they had leverage on all of us. Family, finances, skeletons in our closets. We didn't have a choice. There's always a choice, I growled. Rodriguez nodded sadly. You're right, and I've been living with mine for years. But listen to me, Jack. If they've got Laura, I think I know where they might have taken her. He scribbled an address on a piece of paper. It's an old warehouse by the docks. We used to use it for, well, you can probably guess. I snatched the paper, already heading for the door. I'm going to end this, Frank, one way or another. Jack, he called out as I reached the door. Be careful. These people, they won't hesitate to kill you, or worse. I nodded grimly. Neither will I. The drive to the docks was a blur of rain-slicked streets and racing thoughts. I'd called Sarah and Malone, filling them in and requesting backup. But I knew I couldn't wait. If Laura was there, every second counted. As I pulled up to the warehouse, I saw a faint light glowing from within. Drawing my gun, I approached cautiously. The sound of voices drifted through a broken window. Can't keep this up forever. Someone's going to talk. No one's talking. We've come too far to let it all fall apart now. I recognized the second voice with a jolt. Deputy Commissioner Harris, my direct superior and a man I'd respected for years. Peering through the window, I saw them, Harris, two other high-ranking officers I recognized, and in the center, tied to a chair, was Laura Santos. My blood boiled at the sight of her bruised face. Without thinking, I kicked in the door, gun raised, and with hands where I can see them, the room erupted into chaos. Harris and one of the officers drew their weapons, while the third made a dash for a side door. Lara's eyes widened in shock and relief. "Jack, what the hell are you doing here?" Harris shouted, his gun trained on me. "Ending this," I growled. "It's over, Harris. We know everything." For a moment, nobody moved. The tension in the room was palpable. Guns pointed in every direction. Then, suddenly, the sound of sirens filled the air. Harris's face contorted with rage. "You son of a bitch. You brought backup." What happened next was a blur of gunfire and shouting. I dove for cover, returning fire as I made my way towards Lara. I felt a searing pain in my shoulder. A bullet had grazed me, but adrenaline kept me moving. As I reached Lara, I heard the sound of doors bursting open, voices shouting, "Entity, drop your weapons." When the dust settled, Harris and his accomplices were in cuffs, and I was untying Lara with shaking hands. "Are you okay?" I asked, my voice hoarse. She nodded, tears streaming down her face. "I'm so sorry, Jack. They made me do it. They threatened my father." I pulled her into a hug. "It's okay. It's over now." As we emerged from the warehouse, I saw Sarah running towards us. Behind her, a sea of flashing lights illuminated the night. "Jack, thank God you're all right," she said, relief evident in her voice. I nodded, suddenly feeling the weight of everything that had happened. "It's done, Sarah. We got them." In the days that followed, the full extent of the corruption was revealed. Dozens of officers were arrested, cases were reopened, and the cartel's operations were dealt a crippling blow. As for me, I was hailed as a hero, the detective who had uncovered the biggest police corruption scandal in New York's history. The video that had started it all was proven to be a sophisticated deepfake, created to discredit me. But as I stood in front of the precinct, cameras flashing and reporters shouting questions, I didn't feel like a hero. I felt tired, disillusioned, but also oddly hopeful. We had rooted out the rot, but there was still work to be done. Lara Santos stood by my side, her father Michael on the other. They had both been cleared of any wrongdoing, victims of a system that had failed them. As the press conference ended and the crowd dispersed, I turned to Lara. "What will you do now?" She smiled, a determined glint in her eye. "Finish law school, then join the district attorney's office. Someone needs to make sure this never happens again." I nodded, feeling a surge of pride. "You'll make one hell of a prosecutor, Lara." As I watched her walk away with her father, I felt a hand on my shoulder. It was Margaret, my rock through all of this. "Ready to go home?" she asked, love and understanding in her eyes. I took her hand, feeling truly at peace for the first time in weeks. "Yeah, let's go home." As we walked away from the precinct, I knew that my journey wasn't over. There would be more battles to fight, more corruption to root out. But for now, I had done my job. I had upheld the oath I took all those years ago, to protect and serve, no matter the cost. The road ahead would be challenging, but I was ready, because at the end of the day, that's what being a true detective is all about. Facing the darkness head on and bringing light to the shadows, one case at a time.